This is Revival Press, and we endeavor to republish classic Christian books. You can find all of our books at revivalpress.net. This particular book is by William Booth, titled Visions. William Booth was the founder of the Salvation Army, and we'll go ahead and begin reading this book. Introduction. William Booth was a British preacher who founded the Salvation Army and became its first general in 1878 until his death in 1912. In 1865, Booth was preaching to crowds of people in the streets of London. Some missionaries heard him speaking and were impressed by his dynamic preaching, and they invited him to lead a series of meetings they were holding in a large tent. The first of these meetings was held on July 2nd, 1865, to the poor and destitute of London's East End. Booth brought the good news of Jesus Christ and his love for all. Booth soon realized he had found his calling and began to walk in it. And later in 1865, he and his wife Catherine opened the Christian Revival Society in the East End of London, where they held meetings every evening and on Sundays. They would minister Jesus Christ as Savior to the poorest and neediest, including alcoholics, criminals, and prostitutes. The Christian Revival Society was later renamed the Christian Mission. The name the Salvation Army developed from an incident in May 1878. William Booth was dictating a letter to his secretary, George Scott Railton, and said, "We're a volunteer army." Bramwell Booth, Booth's son, heard his father and said, "Volunteer? I'm no volunteer, I'm a regular." Railton was instructed to cross out the word volunteer and substitute the word salvation. During his lifetime, William Booth established the Salvation Army work in 58 countries, traveling extensively and holding salvation meetings. Booth regularly published a magazine and was the author of a number of books. He also composed several songs. In this book, Visions, is a powerful account of Booth's visions of heaven. This is not merely a depiction of the glory and splendor of heaven. Rather, it is a convicting challenge to all believers. This is a plea from God to leave the trivial pursuits of this earth and begin to pursue the eternal rewards of heaven. It is a call to arms for Christians to begin to rescue the lost that are drowning in an ocean of sin and bring them to the safety of heaven's shores. Revival Press, www.revivalpress.net. Chapter 1, Heaven, but not of heaven. I had a very curious vision of heaven the other day, and I've been much perplexed as to whether I should tell it to my friends or not. The chief difficulty I find in giving it publicity arises from its apparent uncharitableness. It would seem at first sight as though I made the gate to the celestial city narrower than the Bible is supposed to do, and therefore shut out a large number of those fully expecting to be welcome there, and that with a flourish of trumpets. In this narrowing of the way, it will be considered perhaps that my vision is at fault, and therefore somewhat misleading. But on its behalf, I may suggest that as heaven is, as the Negro said, a mighty big place, it may be only some special part of the vast continent of blessedness that caught my attention and which is contemplated in my vision. Then again, I have felt a difficulty in supposing myself to be any other than a good salvationist, and I have not failed to see that this also may lay my story open to objection. But as everyone knows that dreams and visions are fantastic and contradictory things, I have thought that these eccentricities might be passed over for the useful lessons they are calculated to convey. I have therefore decided to let this one see the light, leaving the reader to judge whether it has any interest for or any application to himself. In my vision, I thought that in some way or other I had ceased to be what I hope I am, in fact, a persistent seeker of souls and a resolute opponent of Satan. I thought that I had been transformed into a Christian of that type which we all know is so very common around us. It may seem strange also, but I was not conscious whether I was connected with the Salvation Army or with any other religious organization. All I knew was the simple fact that I claimed to be a follower of Christ and regarded myself as having the favor of God, hoping for the enjoyment of the blessings promised to his people hereafter. In my vision, I imagined that, so far as this world was concerned, Solomon's prayer was answered in my circumstances, for I had neither poverty nor riches. All my temporal wants were fully supplied. I had home, friends, and leisure, and all that was really necessary to happiness in those respects. I was, as I have already said, a Christian. Most of my more intimate friends professed to be the same. We visited at each other's houses and were alike interested in each other's amusements, business engagements, political opinions, and many other things. We bought and sold and married and gave in marriage. In short, we acted as though the world we were in was going to last forever. I thought also that I took some active part in the church to which I belonged. I always attended its services on the Sunday, held a prominent position in its financial management, and occupied myself zealously in teaching Bible truths to the children. Indeed, I considered myself quite a shining light. Now and then, not very often, I visited the sick in a friendly way, especially when they happened to be connected with my own circle of acquaintances. In addition to these good deeds, I contributed a little money to support missionary operations. In all this, I was quite sincere. I had no notion of playing the hypocrite. In fact, I did not do so. It is true I did not stop to think what Christianity really was, although I talked about it freely enough at times and pitied people who did not profess it, but I seldom seriously considered what were the claims of Jesus Christ and the poor. Sinning, suffering world about me, although I had occasionally heard them discussed, but more seldom did I meditate upon the length and breadth of those claims in their relation to myself. I had got into a certain rut of thought, action, and profession, and I went on from day to day, hoping that all would turn out well at the last. But in my vision, I fancied that, without any apparent warning, a dangerous fever seized me. I went down most unexpectedly, and before I knew where I was, the doctor pronounced me to be in a dangerous condition. In fact, in a few hours I was brought to the very verge of death. This was a serious business indeed. Everyone around me was in the greatest confusion, while many of those who loved me were paralyzed with despair. Then followed consultations with other physicians, a hurrying from far and near of my family, many suggestions as to remedies from my numerous friends and acquaintances, together with the most careful nursing which money could procure or affection dictate. But all proved in vain. For my own part, I did not feel any particular alarm about my state, whether it was the suddenness of the visitation, or the benumbing character of the disease, or the effects of the narcotics which the doctors gave me to procure sleep or soothe the pain. I cannot tell. But strangely enough, I seemed to be the least disturbed person in the household. I felt as though I were in a dream. I knew I was dangerously ill, for a relative insisted on my being informed of my real condition, and yet I was not distressed by the announcement. I thought I should recover. Most people do, I suppose, until the hand of death is actually on them. And if not, what need had I to worry myself? For was I not a Christian? Had not Christ died for me? Had I not been converted? Did I not believe in the Bible? Had I not lived a moral life? What had I to fear? And then again, was I not all the time hearing hymns sung for my comfort and prayers offered for my restoration? And that if recovery could not be granted me, It was as earnestly asked that I might pass away without suffering and have a happy admission into heaven. Why should I be very much disturbed? And even if disquieting thoughts did cross my mind, for I could not help questions arising as to whether I had done my duty to a perishing world with my time and influence and money and family, it was all in a dreamy way. So it seemed as though it were impossible to do anything different under the circumstances than let things drift. How could I do otherwise, with the burning fever lapping up with the vital current, and my brain all confused and my energies laid prostrate? Consequently, when I complained that I had not much joy, I readily acceded to a suggestion made by my minister that my condition prevented it. Then I felt, moreover, that if I were not ready for the change, I had neither the thought nor the energy required to begin so serious a business over again as the salvation of my soul. Besides, how can I make the confession in the presence of my wife and children and church comrades that I had been mistaken all these years and that my life had been a failure? No, it was too late, and I was too ill for any such action. One thing I could do, and that I did, I cast myself, with what force of soul I had left, on the mercy of my Savior, and again repeated a couplet which had always been a favorite with me. I am a poor sinner and nothing at all, but Jesus Christ is my all in all. It was with this very sentence on my lips, a sentence taken up and reproduced at the memorial service held on the following Sabbath, that a cold numbness came creeping over me and a great difficulty in breathing followed. My friends were alarmed. I read their apprehension in their faces. Some fell on their knees and broke out in prayer, while others wept. And my dear ones moistened my lips and kissed my brow, and spoke their last and lingering farewells in my ears. Meanwhile, a strange faintness seized me, destroying my consciousness. My next sensation was altogether beyond description. It was the thrill of a new and celestial existence. I was in heaven. After the first feeling of surprise occasioned by this sudden translation had somewhat subsided, I looked around me and took in the situation. It was delightful beyond anything on earth, and yet some of the more beautiful sounds and feelings and scenes of the world I had just left appeared to be reproduced in my new experience after an enchanting fashion. Still, I am constrained to say no human eye ever beheld such beauty. No earthly ear ever heard such music. No human heart ever experienced such ecstasy as it was my privilege to see and hear and feel during the first hours I spent in the celestial country. Above me was the loveliest of blue skies. Around me was an atmosphere so balmy that it made my whole physical frame vibrate with pleasure. By the bank of roses on which I found myself reposing, there flowed the clearest and purest of rivers, which seemed to dance with delight to the murmurings of its own waters. The trees that grew on its banks were covered with the greenest foliage and laden with most delicious fruit. Sweet to my taste beyond all earthly sweetness, by lifting my hand I could pluck and eat the fruit to my heart's delight. In every direction, above and around, the air was not only laden with the richest of odors, yielded by the loveliest of flowers, but rendered vocal with sweetest sounds and filled with fairest forms. Floating about me were beautiful beings, whom I felt by instinct were angels and archangels, seraph and seraphim, cherub and cherubim, together with the blood-washed and perfected saints who had come from the world below, sometimes far away and sometimes drawing nearer. The blue sky appeared at times to be full of white-winged, happy, worshipping, joyous beings, while the whole country, apparently of limitless extent, seemed to be filled with a blissful ecstasy that can only be realized by being experienced. My sensations may perhaps be imagined. At first I was swallowed up with a sort of rapturous intoxication, which was immensely enhanced by the blessed consciousness that I was securely landed in heaven, that I was safe and should suffer no more, far from a world of grief and sin, with God eternally shut in. And then, strange to say, a new set of feelings began to creep over me. Marvelous as it may appear, I felt somewhat solitary and not a little sad, even in the midst of this infinitude of felicity. For up to this moment, I was alone. Not one of the happy beings who were soaring and singing in the bright ether above me, or who were hastening hither and thither, and each intent upon the performance of some high mission, had as yet approached or spoken to me. I was alone in heaven. And then, in a still further and yet more mysterious way, I felt in myself a sort of unfitness for the society of these pure beings who were sailing around me in such indescribable loveliness. And yet how could this be? Had I come there uninvited or by mistake? Was I not counted worthy of being a partaker of this glorious inheritance? I was bewildered. It was indeed a mystery. My thoughts went back to earth, and as though by an angel's hand, the history of my past life was unrolled before my eyes. What a record it was! At the first glance, I seemed to be able to take in the substance and meaning of my entire earthly career, becoming at the same time strangely conscious of a marvelous quickening of my intellectual powers, realizing that I could in a moment take in what would have required a day to understand with my poor, darkened faculties when on the earth. With my quickened mind, I saw to my delight, at that very first glance, that this register of my earthly existence, this supernatural biography, contained no recording of any of my misdeeds before my conversion. Indeed, that part of my life appeared to be very much a blank. Neither was there any mention to my utmost satisfaction of the sins I had committed since that time. It was as though some friendly hand had gone through the roll and with kindly labor blotted out the record of all the evil doings of my human life. Now this was very gratifying. I felt like shouting hallelujah over and over again. In fact, I made some attempt to do so, and well I might, for was I not delivered, through the mercy of Jesus Christ, from the pain of having these things eternally staring me in the face, in this beautiful holy land, among all these holy beings, where it seemed to me that the very memory of sin would defile. Nevertheless, a second glance at my roll appalled me, for while the evil things I had done were omitted, it revealed the kind of life required from me by the light I had enjoyed, and the opportunities with which I had been favored. Nay, the revelation went much deeper, for it described in detail the objects which had influenced me during my earthly career. It set forth the purpose for which my thoughts and feelings and activities had been mainly spent, and brought forth the ends for which I had employed my time, my money, my influence, and all the other talents and gifts with which God had entrusted me to use for His glory and the salvation of men. Every chapter of this roll carried back my thoughts to the condition of the world I had left, and while I mused on it, there came up before my eyes such a graphic picture of its hatred of God, its rejection of Christ, its terrible wickedness, with all the wretchedness, destitution, and abominations flowing out of this state of things, as appalled me. As this part of my vision passed before my wondering eyes, there came into my ears such a hurricane of cursing and blasphemy, and such wild wails of anguish and woe as almost stunned me. It was a terrible recollection. I often seen these sights and heard these sounds when on the earth. Not too often, it is true, for I had hid myself from them. But oh, they blinded and stupefied me now. for they appeared to indicate a condition 1,000,000 times blacker and viler, more wretched and piteous than they had seemed when on the earth. I felt like putting my hands before my eyes and fingers in my ears to shut this hideous apparition out from sight and hearing. So intensely real and present did they seem. They wrung my soul with sorrow and self-reproach. For alongside these horrid recollections, the roll of memory at which I had just glanced showed me how I had occupied myself during the few years which I had been allowed to live amidst all these miseries, after Jesus Christ had called me to be his soldier and to fight for him. I was reminded how, instead of fighting his battles, saving souls by bringing them to his feet, and so preparing them for admission to this lovely place, I had been intent on earthly things, selfishly seeking my own carnal interest, worrying about my own personal cares and anxieties, and spending my life in practical unbelief, disloyalty, and disobedience to all my utmost sacred obligations. I must say again I felt horror-stricken. Oh, if only at that moment I could have crept out of that land of pure delight, about which I had sung so much in the past, and gone back to the world of darkness, sin, and misery, which I had just left, that I might spend another lifetime fighting for my Lord, combating these evils, and striving to save the sufferers by poverty and cross-bearing. How gladly I should have done so. But that could not be. I was a fixture. I was in heaven. Heaven must be my abode forever. And contradictory as it may seem, this thought filled my soul with unutterable regret. And then came another thought, wilder than all that had gone before it. You must not forget that it is a vision I am relating. The thought was this: would it be possible for me to obtain a commission, or rather a permission, to go back to the world, to that very part of it from which I had come, clothed in some human form, and live my life over again, and live it in a manner worthy of my profession, my Christ, and my opportunity? Could this be? At that moment, if an answer in the affirmative had been brought me, I would have willingly forfeited my heavenly blessedness. I would gladly have undergone ages of hardship, ignominy, poverty, and pain. I would have given 1,000,000 of money, nay, a world had it been mine to give. But I could see no hope of such a second probation. What was to be done? I had not been musing thus many seconds, for thoughts appeared to flow with remarkable rapidity. As I have said, in this new world, when quick as a lightning flash, one of these bright inhabitants, who I am watched floating far off in the clouds of glory, descended and stood before my astonished gaze. I can never forget the feelings with which this apparition inspired me. Describe the shape and features and bearing of this noble form I cannot, and I will not attempt to do so. He was at the same time human and yet angelic, earthly and yet celestial. I discerned at a glance that he was one of the blood-washed multitudes who had come out of the great tribulations of earth. I had not only judged this from his majestic appearance, but from an inward instinct that the being before me was a man, a redeemed and glorified man. He looked at me, and I could not help but return his gaze. In fact, his eyes compelled me, and in doing so I confessed to being ravished with his beauty. I could never have believed the human face divine could have been made to bear so grand a stamp of dignity and charm. But far beyond the entrancing loveliness of those celestial features was the expression that beamed through every lineament of that countenance and shone through the eyes that were gazing upon me. Those eyes appeared to me, moreover, as sunlit windows through which I could see right into the depths of the pure and benevolent soul within. I do not know how I appeared to my beautiful visitor. I know not what form I bore, for I had not as yet beheld myself mirrored since I had exchanged mortality for immortality. Nevertheless, I evidently had a deep interest for him, an interest that seemed of a saddening nature, for his features appeared to grow almost sorrowful as I stood there with my eyes fixed on him by a fascinating spell. He spoke first. Had he not done so, I could never have summoned courage to address him. His voice was soft and musical. I understood him almost before I heard his words, although I cannot now tell what language he used. I suppose it was the universal language of heaven. He informed me that my advent was known throughout a certain district of the celestial region, where we gathered the ransomed spirits who had come from the very neighborhood in which I had formerly resided. The tidings of my arrival had been flashed through the heavenly telephone of that particular district. My name had been whispered on every hillside and echoed in every valley, had been breathed from every tree and flower, had been sounded forth at every turn of the golden street, had been articulated in every room of every mansion, and proclaimed from every tower and pinnacle of the stupendous temple in which these glorified saints, day and night, present their worship to the great Father. All who had known me on earth, all who had any knowledge of my family, my opportunities for helping on the kingdom of Christ, whom they worshipped and adored, were burning to see me and to hear me tell of the victories I had won and the souls I had blessed when on earth. And all were specially anxious to hear if I had been the means of bringing salvation to the loved ones they had left behind. All this was poured into my soul by my visitor. I knew not which way to look. Again and again I remembered my life of ease and comfort. What could I say? How could I appear with the record of my life before these waiting spirits? What was there in it better than a long-drawn story of self-gratification? I had no martyr experiences to recount. I had sacrificed nothing for his dear sake worth naming on earth, much less worthy of being published in heaven. My mind was running in this direction, when I think my visitor must have discerned what I was thinking about and felt some pity for me, seeing that he spoke again. Where you find yourself, he said, is not actually heaven, but only one of its forecourts. Presently the Lord himself, with a procession of his chosen ones, will come to take you into the city itself, where you will reside, if he deems you worthy, that is, of your service on the battlefield below has pleased him. Meanwhile, I have obtained permission to come and speak to you concerning a soul who I understand lives near your late residence, and whom I feel a deep interest. Our knowledge of the transactions of earth is, for our own sakes, very limited, but now and then we're permitted to get a glimpse of what is passing there. Can you, he said, looking at me with an unspeakable longing, tell me anything of my son? He was my only son. I loved him dearly, loved him too much. I spoiled him when a child. He had his own way. He grew up willful, passionate, and disobedient. My example helped him not, and here a cloud for a moment settled upon that beautiful brow, but vanished as quickly as it came. Memory has been busy of late with that melancholy chapter of my life, he said, as though talking to himself, and then he returned to the story of his prodigal son. I myself, through the instrumentality of the Salvation Army, was rescued from a life of sin and shame, washed, regenerated, taught to fight for souls, and had the high privilege of winning many to the blood-stained banner of the cross. An accident, however, suddenly overtook me while at my employment, and has suddenly swung me into heaven. And now, he added, where is my boy? Oh, give me some tidings of my boy. He lived near you, I believe. He had business dealings with you. Is he saved? What did you do for him? Is there any hope? Tell me what his feelings to my Lord were when you last spoke to him. And that concludes the reading from Visions by William Booth. Join us for part 2 tomorrow. Thank you, and visit revivalpress.net if you would like a copy of William Booth's Visions.